Welcome, everyone. You're at Peacebuilding Responses to Online Harm. I think we will get going. I think we have a quorum of people here. So today's, we'll have two presentations. The first by Search for Common Ground and the second from Mercy Corps. If everyone in the audience can mute yourself so we can make sure not to have any background information. We'll first have Aiselkin Botoeva. She is a research, evaluation, and learning specialist at Search for Common Ground based in Washington, D.C. She has over a decade of experience designing and conducting mixed media research in international settings on topics such as grassroots governance, religious, political factionalism, and conflict. And she has extensive research experience in Central Asia and broader Eurasia. She holds a PhD in sociology from Brown University. And she'll present Search for Common Ground's research, first of all, and then we'll turn to Mercy Corps, and we'll have two people. Will Ferrogiaro is a senior specialist for peace and technology for Mercy Corps based in Washington, D.C. Previously, he was a consultant at Strategy for Humanity, LLC, for clients like Peace Tech Lab, the UN, and OSCE on hate speech, radicalization, and COVID-19 misinformation. Earlier, he worked for Internews. He led projects on media and conflict and internet policy and human rights. And for the Fund for Peace, he was an analyst and spokesperson for the Fragile States Index, which many of us value highly. He holds an MA in International Affairs from the American University. And next we have Mohammed Ashmil's bio. Mohammed Ismail is a senior program manager for the conflict management and social cohesion portfolio that Mercy Corps has in Iraq. He is managing many projects which cover 4 projects in Iraq. And he's been working around the world since 2018 in peace building, social cohesion, good governance. He has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Mosul in 2002 and a Master of Urban Planning for Cities from Baghdad University in 2009. So the 3 of them will be presenting today. And I will turn it over to Aiselkin to begin. I just want to note for everybody in the audience that this will work best if you all keep yourselves on mute, but add in your questions as we're going along in the chat box so that at the end of all of the presentations, we'll have time to then go through those questions, and I'll be convening them together, grouping them together. But as you're hearing things that spark your interest, please type into the chat box your questions. All right, with that, Aiselkin, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you everyone for joining today. I know it's a stressful time for many of us, and again, I appreciate you all taking the time to join us. I look forward to the Q&A discussion, to various questions that may arise as we speak. So let me just, before I start my presentation, let me start with very simple, a couple of questions, right? We're all on social media to a certain extent. We may use certain platforms, right? Some of us may use more. So, given that experience, could you just, answer 2 quick questions? The first question, and you can type in the chat box, I'll be seeing the answers. So, what have you encountered, right? Since today we're talking about harmful content and the way people actually handle it. And today I'll be presenting our study on that. But, again, before we get into that, what type of harmful content have you encountered? Can you just type in very brief answers in the chat box? Xenophobia, I see. Anything else? Misinformation, various types of misinformation, fake news, right? Direct threats to individuals, religious hate messages, various types of hate speech, racism, sexism, violent language, but also videos and photos and other types of content, right? Misogyny, And really, again, yeah, thank you again for sharing. The list can probably go on and on and on, right? And we could spend several days just talking about various examples of, what that actually is, right? So the second very, simple question is, what have you done then, right? When you personally encountered that harmful content, what have you done? Again, in a few words. Yeah, I see the last message was threat by the ruling party. Mm-hmm. So what have you done when you saw those messages? Engage in an argument, maybe with direct perpetrators of that content, right? You reported it to the platform. Anybody else? Any other tactics that you have used? You have shared resources with those people. Close up and move on. That's very common, right? Alex, my colleague from Search, is saying, I reported it after reading your report. Thank you. Blocking, avoiding social media altogether. So all of these, again, right, are very interesting. I think conversation starters, right? And why, the reason why I started with this, right, is that, let me start off my presentation, is really because those the questions that we try to, do you see my screen now? I'm in presentation, great. So what we really tried to do in our study at Search was to answer these very simple questions, right? But we actually addressed these questions focusing on 3 different target groups. And these were direct participants in violence, right? If you read the report, you can see more detailed profiles, but also explanations of who were involved, who were part of the direct participants in violence. This is former or current members of youth, street gangs, or militant and armed groups. So for example, current and former Al-Shabaab members in Kenya, those who have recently joined Arakan Army in Myanmar, those who are street gang members, right, in the Northern Triangle, and so forth. And then the second category of respondents were those who socialized with direct participants, right? This included family members, educators, such as Buddhist monks, for example, or religious authorities of other kind, social workers, community organizers. In other words, those who directly work with the direct participants in violence, right? And the idea was that they are actually exposed to very similar content, perhaps online, right? And what do they then do, right? Do they actually speak to that vulnerable and at-risk youth groups, and how do they engage and continue those conversations, right? And the third group that we engaged in the study was active resistors of violence, right? And this included local youth, young professionals, civil society organizers, any other type of journalists, for example, right? Or those who have worked in interfaith dialogues. So the idea was that these are the groups that are very well educated, they have spent considerable amount of time, right, thinking about this, they work on this directly. So what do they do, right? Do the tactics actually vary? So just to kind of give you a brief overview, we talked to 68 individuals in 7 different countries. And as you can see, they vary across 4 different regions. So the Northern Triangle, right? It's El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. In East Africa, it was Kenya and Tanzania. In Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan. And in Southeast Asia, it was Myanmar. So what is harmful content, right? First of all, we actually wanted to understand how do these respondents from across these 3 different groups, what do they consider actually harmful, right? What is harmful for them? Because we anticipated already that the answers may vary. And that was true, right? I mean, the responses vary depending on the local dynamics of context. All of these countries have a long-standing history of ethnicity, racial, right, religious-based conflicts and tensions. But we really wanted to understand, okay, so how does that localized conflict dynamic then shapes and understandings, right, of people? What is harmful content? So we came came away with 4 broader categories of harmful content. So the first here is the kind of content that stigmatizes the other, right? I mean, you know, again, conflict is not new in these contexts, but what is new, however, is the way in which people started circulating hateful content to perpetrate, right, and incite the kind of violence across these dividing lines. So, for example, in Myanmar and Kenya, you know, these were the countries where we saw the highest number of reports of hate speech and other calls to incite violence based on religion. Across Guatemala, Kenya, Myanmar, and Kyrgyzstan, we saw and heard accounts of ethnic and racial-based conflict, right? So the kind of content that sort of incites violence based on, you know, long-standing, again, ethnic and racial-based tensions, right? The second category here is the kind of content that, you know, extremist groups, right, and gangs put out, again, using social media. And, you know, gangs terrorize communities, right, through the means of social media by putting out calls for violence, by putting out, you know, threats, right, to kidnap all children or to kill anyone who goes into a certain neighborhood, for example, right? And sometimes these are really, you know, cryptic languages, right? And in other times they are, you know, very explicit calls for violence. And especially our respondents in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, but also Kenya and Tanzania, they spoke about how, you know, street gangs and extremist groups have been sort of really exploiting social media platforms, right, for their needs. The third category of harmful content was really the kind of content that normalizes violence, right, and legitimizes targeted attacks. We were frankly surprised because, you know, in the very beginning, our focus was more on ethnic, religion-based conflicts, right? But what we saw across all of these countries, you know, the overwhelming response was that most recently, you know, social media has ignited, right? Social media has been used to perpetrate and ignite sexual and gender-based violence, right? That targets women, especially those who are in politics, those who are in any other type of leadership role, public figure role, those who are activists, as well as LGBTQ community members and representatives. So in Kenya and Honduras, our participants also spoke about how instances of sextortion have become very, very much a norm, right? And again, what people use is social, right? And finally, the fourth category is, you know, the kind of content that, or in general, examples of how social media is used to surveil, right, but also discipline and punish. We all know very well how authoritarian and liberal regimes have been using social media for those purposes. And in Kenya, for example, respondents across all 3 groups actually spoke about how, you know, those who come from youth leadership positions, right, or current and former Al-Shabaab members spoke about the recent sort of spikes, right, in content that they have seen, where Kenyan Defense Forces shared videos of, you know, very graphic videos and photos of them assaulting Al-Shabaab members, right, and how, you know, they spoke about how that inflamed further revenge attacks. So, you know, what do they do that when they encounter this content? The key takeaways are really that users actually want to minimize, right, their exposure to harmful content, regardless of what background they come from. And mostly they fall on tactics that make them feel in control, right? The first point here may not be as surprising to hear. Yes, you know, we can all imagine that we want to see this less, hear this less, right? The kind of content that really sort of incites the kind of violence that we see then on the ground. But what was more interesting for us to see is a myriad of different ways, right, in which people are trying and actively trying to actually protect themselves and their families and their children and their other networks, right, from the kind of harmful content. But the key here is they fall and they prefer those tactics that actually make them feel like they own it, like they are in control. So, are they flagging harmful content, right? The second question that I asked in the beginning was, what have you done? Some of you said, I reported it, right? So are these respondents on the ground, and those who are especially very close to live in these conflict prone zones, right? How do they handle harmful content? And the short answer to that question, right, whether they're flagging and reporting harmful content through the mechanisms that are made available on social media platforms, the short answer is that no, right? A very small proportion of our respondents actually said that they have in the past reported harmful content. And even those who said that, yes, I have used those mechanisms such as flagging, right, they actually share that they're less likely to continue doing so. And the answers are not, again, so much about awareness, right? I'll get into that in a minute. But the two major points here is that the preferred tactics that users employ, they actually include, first of all, directly engaging with perpetrators of harmful content. Some of you mentioned those examples, right? You actually said that you have done that. And here, what was interesting is that sometimes those efforts of directly engaging with perpetrators involved efforts to engage in a conversation. So, for example, a Buddhist monk that we spoke to in Myanmar, shared how he has reached out, right, through Messenger, through other means to actually engage these people, right, that he sees as perpetrating violence and putting out these really violence inciting content. But in other cases, these actually include examples of how people start actually getting into fights, right? I mean, we have this quote. I have this quote, and in the report you can see a profile of this person. Obviously, we're using pseudonyms here, and you can see many other profiles from all of these different countries in the report, right? But this is just to kind of show you a quick illustration, right, where this person, Azim, a young Uzbek entrepreneur in Osh, Kyrgyzstan, how he talked about when he saw an ethnic Uzbek blogger getting harassed by ethnic Kyrgyz users, right, who were using all kinds of ethnic slurs, were threatening him and his family's security. He and his friends actually decided to reach out to the perpetrators of these, right, and those people who were posting this, and they decided to, what he called, fight it out, right? And it is understandable why end users may actually rely on such tactics, such as directly engaging with perpetrators, such as exit strategies, right? They're very tangible. They provide prompt relief, right? But what they don't do is that addressing the underlying stress and grievances, right? And again, this example from this young person who got into a fight over posts on social media, right? They again indicate how, harmful content online actually entails, right, and leads to the kind of violence on the ground and offline. Just to quickly mention here what I didn't note is the exit strategies, right? So a large proportion of our respondents actually used exit strategies such as blocking, muting, exiting, deleting, right? Whatever apps or WhatsApp groups or any, just kind of deleting a social media app altogether because they were so discouraged, right? But also when we asked the follow-up questions that where we try to understand why they're not using, more formal mechanisms such as, again, flagging, reporting, right? They say, well, some of these people are actually my friends. Some of these people are my family members. They're from my extended kinship network, right? Or they're my colleagues. So again, I think this just kind of indicates the need to understand the social, right, and the relational aspect of how users in conflict-prone settings utilize, right, certain tactics of handling harmful content. So the second, just to quickly, before we get into the lessons learned, or what do we do, right? The second part of the answer as to why these users are not deploying more sort of formal mechanisms, right, of online reporting, really, again, it's deep-seated cultural and political factors, right, that make users reluctant to report. Some people feel unable, and it's really, again, it's not about their lack of awareness of how to use these mechanisms, right? We may assume that that's the case, We may say, oh, we just need to raise awareness. We just need to teach them how to report. But that's not necessarily the answer in a lot of these contexts, right? People feel insecure, right, when they are online and when they even posting some of the things, right? Posting their opinion in contexts, especially where retribution against those who blow the whistle on others is common. Users actually fear that reporting content will threaten their security, the security of their families. These fears then, they really are not baseless. They're rooted in, deeply rooted in their past experiences, right? That then shaped these very localized norms about what it means to tell on someone, to report on someone, right? And then these fears actually get amplified even more when the users feel like there is a lack of transparency when it comes to reporting. So a lot of them sort of used, right, or refer to this analogy of a black box. I don't know what's going to happen, right, when they click on that button report. Who is seeing it? What's going to happen? What it's going to actually end up leading to, right? And some of the respondents, especially from the Northern Triangle in El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala, also spoke about how, the kind of harmful content that remains on social media, especially the kind of content that presidents, right, upper echelon state officials post that are also inciting violence in some cases, right? When they see that still remaining online, how discouraging it is for them to then try to do anything, right? In a lot of cases, they just kind of try to minimize their exposure to social media. So what are the lessons learned for digital peace builders then? What can we all, right, do to make online spaces safer for people, particularly those who live in conflict settings? So these are, what I'm going to present, obviously, are very brief, very short answers. This is currently what we're thinking at Search for Common Ground, but we would really appreciate if you all also, have time, if you have time to skim through the report and see sort of the more extended answer to this question and engage with us, right? I mean, you're more than welcome to reach out to myself, but also to the broader team. But some of the answers basically that we got away with is that there should really be a multi-stakeholder engagement, and by that we mean ideally, right, it would be social media companies themselves engaging, right, with peace building organizations, with local civil society leaders, with certain organizations who are on the ground, who can really provide that kind of localized knowledge about what's going on, right? What is the rhetoric? What are the languages that people use to incite violence? Because if you don't have that sort of very nuanced understanding of what's happening on the ground, you can algorithms can only do that much for you, right, in sort of seeing the spikes in certain rhetoric that people may be using, right, to incite violence. So instead of just relying on existing mechanisms such as flagging as the ultimate solution, right, there should really be this multi-stakeholder engagement to understand and propose ways to actually, right, address this problem. And some of the points here is that this kind of engagement could lead to co-designing and implementing programs, right, that would help to transform the structural, social, and cultural barriers, right, to mitigating harmful content online, to creating these spaces to share concerns, risks, as well as tactics as civil society, religious communities, and youth groups to engage in tackling online harmful content. And finally, this kind of multi-stakeholder engagement would ideally, right, help to examine and understand localized conflict dynamics. Instead of sort of projecting and waiting, we could be doing it, already, right? And also taking into account what end users themselves are emphasizing, right? We really need to be, ideally, right, in an ideal world, the solutions that we would come up with in tackling harmful content would be not just, oh, here is a button that you can click. No, so, solutions that would help them to feel like it's not a black box, right? To help them actually that they are engaging in this sort of conversation, right? And they do have an ownership and control over this process. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ayselkin. That was an excellent presentation. And yes, absolutely. What we're really talking about is a comprehensive multi-stakeholder peace process between civil society, governments, and technology companies to deal with the entire ecology of this problem and not be resorting always to these bilateral solutions, one organization with one company. So let's turn now to Mercy Corps. We'll have Will and Mohammed present. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Let me load up here first. Sorry. One moment, please. Okay, let's see. Try this again, sorry.
And then Will, if you go to view, and then it should, or slideshow at the top.
Sorry. Not sure why that's
I can also share it if you'd like, Will.
fine. Thank you. I'm having
Sure.
trouble uploading.
So I have the previous presentation. I don't have the your presentation.
Right.
It looks like.
Was just confirming. I got it though. Just give me 1 second.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
All right, can you see it? Perfect.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it. First of all, thank you to the Alliance, and thank you, Lisa, for moderating, and thank you all for being here. I'm delighted to give a bit of a presentation on some recent research that we've undertaken and share with you some of our findings and so on. For those of you who are new to Mercy Corps in this space, Mercy Corps is a humanitarian and development agency that works in 40 countries, including many in crisis situations, all of which, to some degree or another, have been affected by social media and conflict. So I think I'm going to kind of present to you a bit of a broader perspective on the impact on society. Iselkin noted, her focus on kind of individual responses, and I thought she made an interesting point, which is in terms of thinking about responses, we need a more nuanced understanding of the impact of social media in societies. So let me just start by saying again that I'm part of the Peace and Tech unit at Mercy Corps. We are a relatively new initiative of peace and conflict. But this research was in part a collaborative effort between our peace and conflict, tech for development, policy and advocacy, and research and learning teams. I'm going to present a little bit about the origins of the research, as well as kind of our main findings, and present to you a bit of a framework that will, I think, help elucidate some of the key questions to ask, really, about the role of social media in different country settings and subnational settings, I should say, as well. And then I'll turn to Mohammed Ismail, who's our senior program manager in Iraq, and he will spend just a couple minutes explaining just how we're actually, as new as this framework is, we're very excited to be taking this and piloting a project in Iraq based on the framework. So that's what will be the focus of the presentation for now. Can you do the next slide? I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. So this research, the current research, builds on a landscape assessment that we undertook back in 2019 that looked at kind of 4 typologies of kind of information disorder, if you will, and came up with some responses to how we might respond. And you can see here, we developed this approach that looked at prevention, looked at monitoring, looked at building resilience, and mitigating impacts. And I'll refer you to that publication. The landscape assessment is on our website, and I'm happy to connect people to it. But you can see we looked at these larger typologies: information operations, political manipulation, digital hate speech, and so on, and came up with this framework for response. But I think one of the things that we wanted to do was to understand kind of if each of these cases and country context is unique, what would help us better understand the pathways to violence that social media can exacerbate. Next slide, please. So we undertook in 2020, we undertook some research across 4 countries. And those countries were Ethiopia, Iraq, Myanmar, and Nigeria. And some research was conducted in the middle belt of Nigeria in 2019. So this is, during this period, of course, much of this had to be done remotely due to COVID-19. But the research was kind of a mixed nature. It involved qualitative interviews, it involved surveys and questionnaires, and also some reliance on secondary, on the literature. The interviews were mainly with our country teams, our partners we work with, as well as local civil society actors there. And several findings suggested themselves from this research. Some of which, for those of you working in this field, these are not entirely a banner headline new items for you. But social media is transforming how, when, and whether conflicts manifest in fragile states. Social media threats are not restricted to social media users. ISOCAN just talked about that. The ethnic and sectarian tensions, things that are pre-existing in a society, are vulnerable, and social media and the weaponization of social media resonates along these existing tensions. The dangers associated with the use of social media as a weapon are particularly acute during windows of risk, and these can be anything from elections to commemorations, for example, of historic events. A 5th finding of the research was that there are key online influencers. And interestingly enough, these key online influencers can be both constructive or malign. And can, in a sense, and this may be a further research question, and some of you may be able to shed some light on this, might be repurposed or redirected as some of the initiatives have attempted. Our sixth finding there is, as you see there, kind of obvious. COVID-19, we just issued a big report, and I recommend that to you on COVID-19 and conflict. A major study we just released, highlights the fact that exacerbated existing conflicts, underlying conflicts and tensions, and exacerbated them online as well, not just locally. Another finding in terms of kind of thinking about responses to these kind of information disorders is that government attempts to police them, if you will, often led to crackdowns on freedom of expression and other rights and liberties and assembly. And then a final one is that the online and offline actors are really important to building resilience in society to digital threats. So these are again, in some ways, these are confirming of other research that's out there. They're probably confirming of some of the efforts that you all made as well. But we use this research to then think about ways to analyze in terms of thinking about responses. The next slide, please. So one of the research led to basically 3 different products, and I'm going to talk mostly about the analysis framework today. But the three products are the analysis framework, some key research findings, and then a policy brief that has some recommendations. And I note that some of them tracked along with what ISILCN recommended as well. Again, all 3 of these reports are up on our website and just posted recently, and they're there for your comment, and we look forward to your engagement with them. Now, as I mentioned with these findings, we then began to evaluate them and think about okay, we understand some of these dynamics. How might we analyze, in particular, not just analyze a context conflict situation, but analyze how social media is having an impact there. So we thought of, we came up with kind of 6 factors to assess. And these would be even useful even in an operational sense, as one sets up whatever programming an organization is doing in a country. These would be useful, we think, factors to assess. So the information architecture, what is the legal framework in which the society operates, and the social media platforms, and what type of regulation is there? How pervasive are particular platforms? What do people use? What is connectivity like? What is internet penetration like? It tells us something about the ecosystem in which people are operating. Assess the underlying conflict drivers. What else as we said earlier in the earlier finding, that social media resonates, and these conflict drivers resonate online as much as they are offline. Again, the third point to assess: who are the key influencers? These can be religious leaders, for example. These could be, in some cases, social media influencers who are really just kind of cultural icons. Say in the Philippines, were used to put out to combat some misinformation around COVID-19. So there's a variety of key influencers with different sort of audiences that might be mobilized and can shape perceptions. Again, as I mentioned, the windows of risk. What are those windows of risk that make these issues particularly acute? They can be, again, elections. They can be commemorations. They can be, even in some cases, with the impact of climate change, they can be herding seasons and so on. We're surprised in some ways just how online so many seemingly completely offline dynamics are manifesting. And then kind of a fifth characteristic or a factor to assess is what are those how are the social media affecting and accelerating these sorts of conflict dynamics. We know, social media allows breadth of information, the greater spread of information, the greater volume of information shared, the greater speed at which people get information before fact checking, for example, can catch up. So what are these characteristics endemic to social media that exacerbate conflict tensions? So that would be a fifth assessment, and that goes back to kind of the information architecture. What are people using? What social media platforms are they using, and why and how? And then finally, we looked at the issue of kind of what are the sources of resilience in a society that might mitigate these digital threats. And I mentioned there is some overlap between the key influencers, right? You can think of particular authoritative figures, for example. You can think of different means by which societies resolve disputes, for example. Maybe traditional dispute mechanisms might be a type of resilience that allows offline conflicts to get diffused before they get exacerbated online. So those are kind of how we saw these kind of six key factors to play out. And one thing I would note is that there is strong kind of interplay. You see the arrows there in the diagram. There is interplay between these. They're not necessarily, as I said, about social media influencers, they're not always malign, they can be constructive. And so perhaps one of the ways to think about in our programming and thinking about initiatives is thinking about what ways in which particular contexts these attributes can be repurposed, can be addressed so that they're constructive and not malign. I think next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have in addition to the analysis framework, we presented a policy brief that both kinds of tries to apply this framework to make it useful in a shorter sense in its application. But we also came up with some recommendations. And again, some of these may not be groundbreaking to you in a certain sense, but we found that these are the things that speak to the factors that we identify in the framework. So I want to turn to Mohammed Ismail briefly, but just give you a sense of the types of recommendations. We identified these as all key stakeholders that have a stake in the types of responses. But we're again very excited to have this framework out, and we look forward to hearing from you about what you think is most relevant about it. Obviously, there's fine-tuning, and just to kind of reiterate what Iselkin's point earlier, which is, we have to have a nuanced understanding of each environment in which we're working, and we think this framework helps us assess what is the system in which we're operating, and it helps us understand who are the key actors, who are the influencers, and so on. So I think if you turn to the next slide, please, and then I think I'll turn over to Mohammed Ismail to talk a little bit. As I said, this framework is brand new. We are talking to different country teams about ways in which we might think about new programming to address the different types of information disorder they're encountering in the countries in which we work. And one of the new places that we're testing this out and we're really excited for is Iraq. And so Mohammed Ismail will talk a little bit about, just a couple minutes, some reflections on the new pilot we've started there. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Will. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on the time zone. Just I will talk about from the point of view for this framework from the field staff. I will go back to 2019 to when this research was started. Iraq team and the field staff was engaged and participate in this research. When the concept and framework was developed by the TSU team, we started to train our national team how to applying about that. At the beginning, when started to train around this framework and concept, it was very difficult at the beginning to understand that framework, and because this is a complex context. But through this training, through the first pilot workshop conducted in Iraq in Erbil, we used an example, we used an evidence related to the environment, which engaged that we trained youth leaders from the civil activists from two governorates, one in the north, Nineveh, and other in the south, Basra. Both of them is different contexts and different impact of the social media on the context and dynamic. Through that amazing workshop and how those youth start to interact to others, start to talking about the examples and evidence from the ground, the framework start to be clear for them, and they starting to know how that framework start to organize their thought, how to design, tailor some of initiative around countering this misinformation and disinformation around specific theme. The youth started now as part of our pilot project, started to design some of initiative based on this framework, based on these elements in the framework, and this initiative, we need to see the value of this initiative when implemented on the ground, about reducing violence or moving that violence from removing that dynamic from the violence to the resilience, how this initiative can be one of the positive thing we can impact it on that. Therefore, we are so excited in Iraq for applying this framework on the ground, especially as I mentioned, the dynamic and context we are working is different between these two provinces. Therefore, we are working for that, and we are trying to test and see the value of that. This is the project started in July. We are in the early stage of the project, but we are excited about the results that we will gain from this framework on the ground. Yeah. That's what I would like to share with all of you. Well, hand over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mohammed Ismail. I would just say in closing, I think there's a couple questions, as we iterate this, and we've had a number of conversations with our country teams. One of the things that we've, new questions abound, right? And of course, I think one of them is kind of thinking through next steps, and we look forward to your responses here. But one of the questions that has occurred to me is kind of, all right, we're looking at these country and subnational contexts. What is the interplay, for example, of external actors, operations on local underlying conflict drivers? And so this is just kind of another, as we're talking about this in different country contexts, we start to think about external actors, say, for example, extremist organizations and so on. Why and how do those narratives that are external to a country setting have an impact? What is the take up and the resonance there? So I think that's, again, further, we're thrilled that this framework's helping us look at some of those questions, and hopefully it's sparking some questions for you. So thank you again.
Thanks to each of you for these excellent presentations. We're going to open it up for more questions from the audience here in a minute. I just want to make a couple of observations. So this is part of our series at the Alliance for Peacebuilding on digital peacebuilding. We have a community of practice around this. And one of the questions that's come in is, you know, does digital peacebuilding include this sort of threat assessment? And yes, it absolutely does. As peacebuilders who are trying to get up to speed on technology, we are both focused on digital harms, digital threats, and what our organizations need to be doing in order to address disinformation and hate speech and sort of develop programming around the way social media communication amplifies and escalates, basically taking these threats to scale. On the other hand, we are looking also at how do peacebuilding organizations do positive, constructive work on technology to foster social cohesion, to do digital dialogue, to do the kind of peacebuilding work that we do also at scale. So, you know, social media is simply a communication channel, and it can be used for great evil and for great good. And we need to really be looking at both of these things as we move forward as a field. Let me stop then and see what has come in. If you have a question that you would like to ask in person, we'll ask that you unmute yourself and ask that at this point. So go ahead with that. And then I'll also ask our Mercy Corps and Search for Common Ground staff if you can be reading through the chats and responding to anything that you see there that's a question related to your work. Is there anyone who'd like to speak? You can raise your hand or you can just jump in. I don't see anyone yet, so let me just ask this question. I mean, both of you, all three of you have sort of noted the need, and I've also heard it from many other colleagues around the world, for points of contact at social media platforms that you can go to. This has been one of the big difficulties, is that only a few organizations have those points of contact. One thing I'm talking to my colleagues at the Just Peace Labs, where we've been working this summer on recommendations for how we move forward as peace builders with conflict sensitivity. And one idea has been developing sort of platforms that we can meet as a field together with technology firms. Is that something that you all would agree with, or do you have thoughts about how do we address with these diverse threats arising from different peacebuilding groups around the world on the ground?
I would just like to quickly note that I do have other colleagues from Search for Common Ground, namely Althea, who is our advisor on digital peacebuilding, and Alex, who has much more experience on social media and peacebuilding. If both of them would like to jump in, I just wanted to note that they're here.
Thank
Alex,
you.
Yeah, please feel free to jump in.
I also see that somebody from the Peace and Justice Alliance raised your physical hand. Do you have a question?
Oh, sorry, I was unmute. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon from Toronto, Canada. My name is Mominul Haq. I'm founder director for Peace and Justice Alliance. I want to bring you kind notice about what's going on in Bangladesh. Since 2009 in Bangladesh, the present regime, they come to the power, and after they come to the power, they controlling not only the ground, they are controlling social media, Twitter, anything you write down against government oppression, corruption, bribery. So they introduce a controversial Digital Security Act, and they already arrested so many activists, journalists, human rights defenders, and they put in jail without proper trial. and it's kind of a serious situation going on in Bangladesh. Bangladesh people afraid to say something, even in the social media, like the real situation during this COVID-19, people dying on the road without real treatment. So government hiding, and if you write down anything about government not helping people, so they track you by different tools, surveillance tools they have, and they arrest you, and they give power to the law enforcement agencies. You will not able to go to the court, and the justice system also, they created corruption. So you go to hire an advocate and you go to the court, but court will not listen to the victim. They listen to what government says. So they are not giving you bail, so they put you in jail, remand. Lot of torture happened in Bangladesh. So now Bangladesh people want international attention and international intervention to get back their human rights and social justice and democracy. So I am unlisted request to the audience, if you have any way to raise this issue, we will be grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Are there other questions or any responses from our panelists?
I just wanted to quickly jump in to respond to that. And I think, again, if you do have time to look through our report, I mean, definitely some of what you're saying has resonated a lot, right, with our respondents across all 7 countries, right? And what we ended up hearing is that, yes, I mean, it's not as easy, right? I mean, social media, on the one hand, you would think there is this sort of anonymity, right, and confidentiality that you can be granted, but at the same time, people on the ground from a lot of these contexts say, no, I don't feel secure, I don't feel safe, right? Because, again, as you said, security forces have been using increasingly, right, in various contexts to surveil and to monitor what is being written. And but the other flip side, I think, that we haven't yet raised is also the troll, right? The so-called the troll factories, right? How those are also increasingly sort of having this presence on social media, and people are really, even my family members often say, it's so hard. It has become so hard to even know what is right, because there is this flood of fake news, and people are really finding it difficult to sort of tease out what is true, what is not, who is right, who is the authority, right, to have the right say in certain matters. So yeah, I would totally agree with a lot of what you had to say, and I do hope that you have a chance to look through the report and to engage with us in the future. But I think also, Lisa, I think people were trying to clarify your question that you raised earlier. Just wanted to point that out.
Okay, yes, my question was whether we should be thinking as a field for setting up some sort of reporting platform, because so many peace-building organizations are working in fragile and conflict-affected situations, and we're hearing from local partners about urgent technology-related threats. And most of these have been dealt with on a bilateral, one organization reporting to one tech company. As we know from our work on security sector reform, in general, our human security platforms, sometimes I think the scale of the threat is so great at this point that we need some kind of human security platform for reporting and discussing the kinds of threats our partners are reporting, civil society on the ground. So again, it's like a coordinated peace process involving government, tech companies, more than one, just the ones that are most crucial, as well as us coordinating within our peace-building organizations about what we're hearing, so that we get a little bit more momentum and coordination happening around these threats. I wondered if people had reactions to that idea. It's been related to both of the presentations.
take a minute, Lisa. I think this is an excellent point. I think what I would suggest is connecting this with what Fred wrote in comments, actually seeing what is already being done in the framework of tech platforms. What, like we saw so many of them started opening departments on ethics, actually dedicating roles to human rights. Is this enough? Like, I'm just wondering myself, like, does this cover the needs that peace builders actually identified? You know, what are the challenges out there that we saw in our field? Are the activities of big tech companies enough for this, and how we can make connections with the two? And definitely the solutions have to be found together. So I absolutely agree, Lisa, with this idea, and hope we will find a solution similar to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Branka. Excellent. Hannah from Just Peace Labs, do you have anything to add in here, or can you get on deck to talk about the work Just Peace Labs is doing?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa, for mentioning that. And I will say it's great to hear everyone sort of making these calls for the work that I think Lisa and myself and Jen Easterday at Just Peace have sort of underway right now. So we're trying to do sort of just that, map what's already being done, the tremendous work that's been done within civil society and academia, also sort of get a better sense of where industry's at within all of these different, I think, too frequently siloed frameworks, right? So human rights, ethics, of course, conflict sensitivity, human security to some degree as well. So to understand sort of where we are, the different frameworks and sort of languages or lexicons that are available to us that are being used to start to address these issues. And then from there, understand, I think, better what still needs to be done, all with the end goal, as Lisa already alluded to, of being able to bring together those folks from civil society, academia, and industry to start to sort of work on more practical and operationalizable solutions. But certainly, yes, I mean, I think there have been tremendous advances sort of in-house within industry, at least in terms of starting to recognize and prioritize these issues, in terms of sort of how far that's gotten us in solving the problem. I think that it is still very much a work in progress, but I'm happy to share more about our research. I'm sure Lisa is as well.
If I could just, Lisa, add in just a couple of responses. First, our colleague from Bangladesh and our other colleague speaking or addressing Philippines in the chat. I think both of these, both of your points highlight the fact that we can't just look at social media and digital threats in isolation, that they are part of an overall, and that's what kind of why I think we found our framework to try and address this issue, which is kind of what are the underlying tensions. Our colleague from Bangladesh spoke about the rampant civil liberties restrictions and so on. These things are coincident with some of the challenges, and so I just wanted to flag both his point and Ramona's in the chat about that. There were I noted a couple points that are observations again from the chat that people mentioned with Iselkin's first question about what people do individually when they come across harmful content. And a number of people said turned off or just avoided. And you think just even amongst our group here, right? Just think about the decline in access and how that. And so maybe just as a provocation, let me just suggest that that maybe we ought to further bring a human rights lens into what we're talking about here, because the infringement upon full enabling and access to rights that these kind of disorders have on people's rights and access. And then someone also mentioned very constructively, I think, the point about digital security. And I know there's a number of organizations that work in this area, often quietly for all the important reasons. But yes, I think that's maybe something we really, obviously there's been a focus on digital security for human rights defenders, but maybe we need to think how to broaden that in the way that we've done with media and information literacy as well. So just, those are a couple points. And I also wanted to salute my two colleagues, Adrian and Omra, who are here and who are welcome to add any comments about our research as well. Please feel free to do so.
I think both Alex, my colleagues, and Althea are responding to some of the questions, but does either of you want to jump in?
Hi, everyone. This is Althea. I can jump in for a moment. You know, I think that already Branka and Hannah already addressed a little bit of the dynamics between the social media companies and how to engage them. And I will just underscore much of what they're saying. I mean, they're absolutely hiring and they're hiring people from the Peacebuilding and kind of international security spaces to try to figure out how to address the sheer volume of harmful and problematic content on their platforms. And I would just point maybe to add a little bit to what they've already stated, that you know, when we look at what does engagement look like between peace-building organizations and the tech companies, that we also need to address the power asymmetries between us because of the ways in which really in many ways, in my own experience engaging with some of those companies, that the privacy and security and proprietary information that they hold on to makes it very difficult to understand the approaches that they have already taken to address these issues, as well as the limits in terms of their own incentives to do so. And I think if we don't address you know, the business models that they're operating on, it will be really difficult to actually shift the paradigm in terms of how they even conceive of or construct content moderation policies. And I think that that's just a really uphill battle that we are in the midst of right now, while also facing just incredible threats because of the sheer volume of content online. And Lisa, I think the concept of, you know, this engagement around kind of flagging threats for social media companies is a really interesting one. I know one of the ways in which the companies are able to identify those threats in real time is by the sheer virality of content. So when content goes extremely viral very quickly, you know, they have alerts to be able to detect that and flag it. But in that approach, we're seeing really a kind of firefighter approach. So wait until a crisis emerges and then try to address it as quickly as possible. And I think the strength of peace building communities and, you know, peace builders on the ground in these contexts is that oftentimes we have other forms of early warning for rises in tensions and conflict in these contexts. And so I do think that there's a lot that can be done to flag that in advance. But I also want to caution against peace building organizations being put in the position of doing that work for them and either not being compensated for it and or you know, kind of filling that gap that they also ought to be taking responsibility and ownership over. So those are some of my both personal views and as well as some of my experience based on trying to engage in this space. So I hope those were helpful contributions to that piece.
Excellent. Thank you, Althea. Are there other questions?
I also want to flag, one of the folks in the chat mentioned the recent election in Zambia and the role of social media there. And if she's still on the call, I'd welcome hearing about that, just to get a report out of from her. I'm not sure she's still on the call. Gloria Hingoma, is she still on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
yes,
wonderful. Great, thank you. You made the point about the role of social media in the election. I think we'd all welcome hearing a report.
Oh yes, we've just had our general elections, and we have a new president here, and the whole electoral process has been marred with a lot of social media, people are using social media actually to influence the electoral. A lot of violence being seen on social medias, and a lot of different topics that relate to the election and the parties involved being portrayed in ways that either incite violence and also, put the whole process in a compromised way. For example, even the institutions of governance, which have been mandated to coordinate the electoral process, have had a lot of what can I say? Have had a lot of people trying to criticize, openly on social media, and this has influenced also how the general population perceive, the institutions of governance and also that of the election parties involved. So this has really been an eye-opener for us peace builders here in the country, because if we cannot sit rather and just look at how the social media is being abused and how it is used in a way that compromises our peace in our country. So this has come actually at the right time for us to learn some of the ways we can help counter disinformation and help our people get to learn how we can strategize and ensure that we still maintain our peace in our country. Of course, we fall under the civil society actors. It's very important that such information is disseminated to civil society and how they can take up and ensure that people are aware of how to, address their social media, the way they are able to portray themselves on social media. So this is, for us in our country, it has really been an issue, and this information has actually come at the right time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gloria, for sharing what's happening there. Whitney Thomas, you have asked a question here online. Would you like to ask that in person? About the role of the government and regulation.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to know, I think that Will and Mohammed briefly touched on it, but I want to know if there's more. Like, we've had the issue with Mark Zuckerberg having to testify. I mean, if we talk about the government being intervened, would it look something like that? Or do we go the opposite way and say for these other countries, you shouldn't get your government involved? Because a lot of people saw Zuckerberg having to testify is also kind of a issue with freedom of speech. So what do you all think about that? And how would we get the government involved in these other countries with social media and stopping these threats? Is it possible? Is there a line there?
I can quickly.
I'll just respond quickly, Lisa, and then certainly you and others can weigh in. I would just say, Whitney, thank you for the question. From my standpoint, there's a lot, people have made a number of recommendations. We make some recommendations in our policy brief to the social media companies. And I know Hannah and Lisa's done a lot of thinking and writing about this area as well. I guess the one thing that I would argue for, and I heard from USAID colleagues about this recently, is we're still not exactly, in terms of, say, disinformation, for example, we're still not exactly have enough data on kind of how that operates and how, and in part that's good reason, because many times the disinformation is perpetrated by state actors. So we don't have enough data to analyze just exactly how that's coming to bear. I would note, I thought Althea made a really good point, which is unless something gets to the volume of virality, the companies, it's easier for them to address it at that point. But at that point, many of our societies in which we work in, we're already harmed. And so I think there's a level of social response that that we as peace builders need to address. And I think the companies, I'm one that am thinking about kind of a charter of rights or a kind of charter of responsibilities too. And I'm not the only one clearly who's thought of that, but I do think that it is pertinent. So I would leave it there. And
thanks. Iselkin?
I also see that we're at time, so I'll be very short. Just to answer the question, Whitney, I appreciate that, and I think it's very important. It definitely, our research shows that it's a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, a lot of our respondents, and actually some of that got left out of this particular report, but a lot of the respondents from Kenya, from Kyrgyzstan, from, other contexts as well, they were talking about how, when I see someone assaulting somebody else on the street, right? What do I do? The common trope is for me to pick up the phone and call the police, right? But what do I do when I see, for example, an activist, right? A social or civil society activist getting assaulted online, right? Who do I actually report to? Yes, of course I can report it to, I can flag, I can do whatever else, but, they don't really, people on the ground don't really see social media being able to keep those people accountable, right? And they really, at length, spoke about how they would like to, right, actually have government agencies who could, right, or even just the same police, right, where they could report. And people actually have been reporting some of the ethnic-based, religion-based, right, assaults apparently to police. And in some cases, what we also learned is in Kenya, I think, our respondents spoke about this particular agency. I'm blanking on its name, but that is actually put in charge of monitoring, right, these kinds of harmful content. And we can say that's great, right? We would love to see that, and for people to actually take a tangible, again, action when they see that. But we're just speaking, of course, about how it's a double-edged sword, and what do we do with surveillance? What do we do with people disappearing, right? And all kinds of horrible things happen for the things that people post online. So I don't have a very good answer to that question, unfortunately, right now, but I think it's really important.
Thank you so much. These two reports are really groundbreaking. They've really added a lot of new analysis. So I want to encourage everyone who's here to read the Search for Common Ground and Mercy Corps reports that have just come out and share them, because part of our challenge is just getting the digital peace building field acknowledged. Many people out, especially in California, have never heard of peace building yet. So we really need to be socializing that our community is out there. We're thinking about these things, and we're developing new frameworks like these two papers have. In closing, I want to say two things. Althea has asked in the question in the chat here about, can the peace building field really collate together what we've done to address disinformation and hate speech? And an organization called Dangerous Speech has already put together a lot of these resources. So they just put out this summer basically a bibliography of all the different research, quantitative and qualitative research on counter speech is what they're calling it, but it's kind of this response to disinformation and hate speech. So that's a really important read to understand that academia is out there testing lots of ideas about how to best respond to disinformation and hate speech. But also a number of us have been talking in other of our digital peace building community of practice forums that, many of us, or many of these peace building organizations, were doing digital media literacy training. And actually, I think we have a bit of a different twist on it than other groups, but we haven't really named that as such, because we're coming with conflict transformation communication skills in our background. When we teach digital media literacy, it has a different flavor. And I think we need to be really clear that there's a benefit to that, hopefully, that our field has something unique to offer here that other groups doing digital media literacy maybe aren't thinking about. So with that, I will close and just say, tune in, sign up for the listserv to be on this digital peace building community of practice, because every month we're having technical demos of how peace building organizations are using technology, and we're having discussions like this every month. So write to the Alliance for Peacebuilding if you're not on our listserv already, get on it, and we hope to see you again. Thanks so much, everyone. Fantastic reports and excellent conversation.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Lisa, and thank you all.
And thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.